Gonna start in three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, we as Team Government opposes the stigmatization of these romantic relationships that are built upon by exchange of money and material needs. For example, like sugar daddy, cougar mom kind of relationships. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about why these relationships are not morally wrong. Okay. So I'm going to talk about why actually these actions are morally justified, or at the very least, it is morally excusable. We say morally excusable when the actions may not constitute a morally justifiable action or constitute a morally right, but it isn't morally wrong either. So we may as well excuse it and say this action is acceptable. So I'm going to talk about three things in my first point. First of all, I'm going to talk about the nature of these romantic relationship that is a covenant. Second of all, I'm going to talk about morality. When do we deem something? When do we deem a relationship moral or not moral? Three, I'm going to talk about why, in the framework of relationship, uh, these kinds of relationships are actually moral. First of all, the nature of relationships, any kind of relationship, from friendships to romantic relationship to relationship with your mom and dad, it is all a covenant in nature in which you pledge something to the other person and the other person pledges something to you. This is most apparent when you say your wedding vows. When you say your wedding vows, you pledge to give your love and your life to your spouse. Your spouse pledges to give his or her love also to you. And in your mom and dad's relationship, your mom and dad pledges to support you until you are financially able to do so, and you pledge yourself to be under your mother and your father's care. What I'm trying to say is that in the relationship between cougar moms, for example, sugar daddy, they're essentially pledging what is their love and my affection for you to the sugar daddy, and the sugar daddy pledges his affection to and his or her money. So what I'm trying to say is that all kinds of relationship is under the basis of a covenant, and it is also the same for these material-based relationships. We don't see that there is any difference, fundamental difference between the other one. So that begs the question: when do we deem this kind of relationship moral or not? When these relationships are built on the very same foundations of any other kinds of romantic relationship, we say that a relationship is moral when it gives each party fulfillment and it does not bring about physical or emotional harm that cripples the victim or potentially harm threatens the victim's life. So we have to say that all relationships are based on some kind of covenant that is a give or take, and we have established to you just a while ago. So why is this principle important, and why should it be selected in the evaluation to judge whether or not this is moral or not? This principle is important because it acts in the principle of self-interest. When you get fulfillment, when you get fulfillment in a relationship for yourself and the other party gets fulfillment, we say that it is in the framework of self-interest in the Kantian morality. And to gain fulfillment for yourself, we can say that it is a self-interest as long as it is not at the expense of others. In the case of these material-based relationships, we dare say that this is actually a matter of self-preservation. Why is that so? First, I'm going to talk about who these kinds of people that get into the sugar daddy and sugar baby relationship is. The younger ones who are usually poorer and need the money, they're usually people that live in poor parts of society, people whose day-to-day life has been failed by the government, that the people whose daily thoughts are about, when can I eat? Can I afford this rent? Will I get evicted by my landlord? The plights of these people means that they have to find ways to self-preserve themselves. They have to find ways to find money. And more often than not, society, especially when we see the more prevalent kind of relationships, are those sugar daddy with little young girls. The problem is our society is inherently sexist and very patriarchal dominated, in the sense that women, especially when they're young and pretty face, people will just see her as another pretty face. No one will care about your own talents. No one will care about how good you are at work. They'll only see you as a pretty face. So one of the best ways, we dare say, although not ideal, the best way they can get out of this is to find another guy that is pretty rich and to basically give themselves to these people. This is the reality of the patriarchal world that we live in. If the opposition side wants to stigmatize this kind of relationship, we say that the opposition side of the house needs to actually show us why it is it is justifiable because this is caused not by these women that are promiscuous. This is caused by the rots of our society. We say that this is something that the opposition should actually think about first before actually creating any kinds of argument to stigmatize these people. So also, we would demand that the opposition shows why we should deem the self-preservation of these younger women and younger boys to a lesser extent is immoral. Therefore, we should stigmatize it. This is something that the opposition needs to justify. Okay, the second thing, I'm going to talk about the things about the asymmetry of power that people say are inherent of these relationships. We say that even if you believe that this relationship is morally unjustified and it is not morally excusable, it is still wrong and morally unjustified to stigmatize them. Why is that so? First, to stigmatize someone, it is morally wrong because it is none of our business. We believe in the principle of agency, that these women who live in a patriarchal dominated society, these women who do not have material wealth, they have no agency over their life. They do what people say in order to survive. They will do what their landlord asks of them in order not to get evicted. So we dare say that it is empowering actually for us to give them agency to choose who their partner is. And also, if you say that they are not having agency, they're coerced into these kinds of relationships with these pedo daddies or predatory cougar moms, we say that to stigmatize these people is still morally unjustified because we are just sitting here criticizing them and we do not listen to their plight. We do not look at what are the motivations that drive them to do so. What are the situations? How has the government failed them? How has society failed them? We say that this is ignorance of their plight and this destroys their heart. The thing is, opposition and government side of the house wants to protect these younger people, right? However, when the opposition side of the house stigmatizes this kind of relationship, they strip away all of this and they just say that you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. We believe that it is morally unjustifiable. And this leads me to my second point, that why then is this kind of stigmatization morally unjustifiable? In case it isn't clear, we say that it is morally unjustified when stigmatization causes one, emotional and mental harm to the affected party, in which I have just explained to you how this will actually create mental harm for them. They will be ostracized from society. People will point fingers at them and say, oh, you're just a promiscuous young face with a good body. You're lazy. You don't want to work. You can't do anything. You just want to find a good daddy. Or for young boys in our patriarchal society, men are expected to find work, and they will say, you are a good for nothing boy. You just want to find some cougar mom and just enjoy her money. The thing is, these people, we just ignore them. We create more emotional stress. We make them ostracized from society. This is extremely harmful. And if your goal is to protect these people, I say opposition side of the house, you have a very hard case to propose. And we say this, if you are actually wanting to protect these people, we should not stigmatize them. Instead, we should get grassroots movement and propose for institutional reform. We want the government to restructurize the way that they conduct society and our patriarchal society as a whole. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you. The first speaker of matter spent 8 minutes 22 seconds. Without further ado, let's call the first speaker of negative.
Sorry ya, masih pelan banget.
Audible?
Iya, sekarang audible.
Okay. Second speaker, time is yours.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, I can start my speech now, right?
Very clear, yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The problem with the case of the government is that people often don't realize what they're getting into. They're unable to give consent as people have no experience as to what a relationship is supposed to look like. And on top of that, romantic relationships that have no foundation are at a high risk of becoming toxic relationships. That is the main problem of the government's case. The source of this problem is that when you do it purely based on monetary gain, neither of you are going to be happy. It's simply going to be seen as a means to an end. As a disclaimer, we still support the narrative that that's your moral responsibility to help your partner. However, when these relationships are blatantly based on monetary funding, when there is no chemistry, when they met within a week, we simply cannot support that. Our burden of proof is on which one is more effective in catering to the needs of the couple and which one is morally justified. Before I go into my arguments, I have 2 points of rebuttal. My first rebuttal is that the government team mentioned on how these relationships are actually the same as relationships that are based on love. Ladies and gentlemen, we simply believe that this is not true because the people simply don't feel like that when they're getting into these relationships. These people instigate these sort of relationships not because they're seeking for love, not because they actually want fulfillment by the end of the day. They simply do it as it's a necessity because they see it as they want to get money, so they're able to actually afford the things that they actually want. There was actually no chemistry, or there is no thought of the long process that's going to happen after you actually start this sort of relationship. We simply cannot support that. But even if that is not true, ladies and gentlemen, even if they do start these relationships with a passion, with the intent to be a mutually successful thing, it is still going to, by the end of the day, it's still going to cause them both an amount of harm because there's not going to be enough sort of foundation to actually prevent it from spiraling out of control. I'll later get into this in my arguments. Now, my second rebuttal is that the first speaker mentioned on how these people have already consented, therefore it's okay for us to actually allow this sort of relationships to actually take place. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, consent is simply not guaranteed in these sorts of relationships. Many families force their kids to marry rich people. The government government's team simply can't play the best case. Many of these sorts of relationships aren't actually with the consent of these people, and there's multiple variable factors. For example, these people are pressured into these relationships by third parties or etc. Secondly, even if consent is present, later we will explain in my arguments why it's harmful for the relationships to run. And thirdly, the government's arguments only work when these people are so poor that they can't survive by themselves. However, this is simply not true. We think that on the government side of the house, we're simply going to be stripping away their sort of potential. Fourthly, there's no link back to stigmatization. They're just saying that materialistic relationships are okay. However, we think that these things can still exist. However, under other sorts of circumstances, without the sort of harms that will be present within these sorts of relationships. Moving on to my arguments on how why scrutinizing romantic relationships is effective in catering to the needs of these people in these relationships. Now, firstly, at the top of my arguments, I just want to make it clear that oftentimes these are disproportionately causing women of lower income to start the relationship due to multiple factors. For example, on how men are often seen as the breadwinner of the family. They're the people who have the responsibility to actually provide in these sorts of relationships. That is why we think that it's going to cause a disproportionate amount of these vulnerable women to actually have this to actually seek these sorts of relationships by the end of the day. And secondly, it's more socially acceptable for men to hold the power in the relationship or to seek these pleasures. To get a real world example, you can simply see it when the porn industry completely caters to men's desires or tastes, or when you see strip clubs who only performers consist of females. This makes these professions very dangerous, as instead of a two-way relationship, it often leads to men dominating the relationship and seen as if they're the ones in control. So let's analyze what these toxic relationships will eventually look like. Oftentimes, it's going to be without consent because these people simply have no other metric of identifying whether or not these sorts of relationships are going to be harmful or not. They have no prior experience as to what a successful relationship is going to be like. They don't actually know how long these relationships are going to last. They don't know the mental capacity or the mental sort of burden that's going to be present in these sorts of relationships. We think that it's simply unacceptable to keep these vulnerable people from continuing and to partake into these sort of relationships. Secondly, it's going to be emotionally draining. You're going to have to be constantly present to these sort of men. You have to constantly be able to cater to their desires, even if it's going to be painful during in bed, even if you have to actually cancel their other sorts of opportunities, even if it comes at the sacrifice of your social structures or etc. We think that this is going to be very mentally draining and can be eventually traumatizing for these sorts of people. Now, thirdly, these relationships can sour. We think that by the end of the day, these people who grow dependent on these sorts of people, on these sorts of sugar daddies, these people are simply not going to have a desire to actually continue this sort of passion. They're simply going to see this as a way for them to get money. It's not going to be, and this only hinders their ability to make future future relationships as you're unable to partake in those sorts of relationships simultaneously. Now, what do these victims experience? Do we think that these people are actually going to grow dependent on these sort of sugar daddies because they're going to actually see it as because not only are there large amount of time going to be spent on catering to this, but they're also going to strip the opportunities of them seeking other means of jobs. Not only that, but they also simply aren't happy, their time is wasted, etc. The harms of this is that the emotional trauma that they're going to be experiencing, that they have simply all of their rights stripped away from them, is going to be extremely burdening. And not only that, but they're simply validated people who think that they can own these sorts of people. On our side of the house, how these actors are going to be affected or benefited is that we think that these people simply won't grow to depend on these sorts of people to begin with. Why these people don't need these sorts of relationships to survive? Because they don't need to oftentimes they don't need a lot of funding to actually instigate these sorts of relationships in the first place. You need a phone, you need makeup, you need dresses to make yourself presentable. You need connections, and a lot of free time could have been used to seek other professions. They simply see these professions as a means to get rich quick scheme, and that doesn't require a lot of effort. So these relationships are literally stripping away the opportunities from these people to actually seek other sorts of professions. Now, people who actually do need this money, we think that will actually be much better benefited if they can, because they can actually do other things. For example, they would have other exit mechanisms, such as they can save their money, so they can simply afford the bare minimum, for example, food, etc. And they can use the time to at least gain a minimum wage job or a blue collar job that could otherwise not be able to obtain, because all of the time would have been dedicated to supplying to that sort of relationship. But even in the very worst case, at least they can still live off of welfare, and they don't have to live with the constant emotional trauma that's going to be present on the government side of the house. Now, moving on to my principal argument on why it's simply immoral to have these sorts of relations present. Now, we think that firstly, it's going to objectify women as it strips away their rights. We think that these men are going to see it as it's okay to limit their freedom of movement, for example, not allowed to live far away, so they're still able to reap the pleasures of these women, or etc. We think that it simply normalizes the idea that you're allowed to strip away the rights, and you're actually allowed to force your sort of own ideas onto these sorts of vulnerable women simply because you're paying them to actually do these actions. We think that this simply strips away their rights. It simply isn't acceptable on the government side of the house. Second reason, as it's not morally correct, as it doesn't fulfill the purpose of romantic relationships by the end of the day. Materialistic wealth is very arbitrary and random. We think that it's going to be very not inclusive, because lots of people are going to feel alienated because they're not going to be able to feel that they're not going to be able to meet the standards of these sorts of things, where you're supposed to actually have the moral responsibility to supply to these sorts of relationships. We think that's simply very immoral to actually normalize this sort of idea. Secondly, is that it hinders the security aspect of these relationships, as these sorts of relationships are very vulnerable. For example, if the woman isn't pleasuring enough, the man can simply break off the deal, or etc., essentially removing their safe space, as these relationships are actually a large amount of ways for them to actually cope with their sort of insecurities, or etc. We think that emotional fulfillment will never be achieved on the government side of the house. We're very proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for the speech. First speaker of the negative, spend 8 minutes and 35 seconds. By the way, Ambardi itu negatif ya, kok di ini go.
Nggak kedengeran, Jeff, sorry.
Tes.
Masih belum kedengeran. Lu ngomong sih, kita kedengeran dikit sih, tapi kayak it's very low.
Oh ya, pantas.
Masih saya ini.
Volumenya emang kecil. Tes.
Nah, sekarang oke.
Atau dari dari zoomnya yang memang udah.
Oke.
Before that tadi yang Ambardi tadi cuma mengingatkan aja, itu kan kamu opposition tapi di itunya name-nya government. Oke.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Jadi agak confused, tapi I think you know your roles. Okay. Without further ado, let's call second speaker of the affirmative team.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start my speech in. Actually, sorry. Bentar banget, I need to go to toilet.
Alright, okay. Kalau ada yang mau ke toilet bisa sekarang.
Yeah. Sorry for that. I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Members of the House, in my speech, I'm going to talk about the theory of autonomy, which is going to nicely engage with the notion of competence that they're talking about, competence to make decision, and secondly, as well, on the availability of information, and finally, on what do exactly mean by coercion. We think that coercion is not as wide as they think, and therefore this relation is justified. Secondly, as well, I'm going to also engage on on the mechanics of stigmatization. When does stigmatization, is stigmatization successful? It's likely to change behavior, and when is it likely to backfire? And I think that in this situation, stigmatization is likely to backfire, so that even if the government believe that stigmatization is justified is acceptable, it is still not going to work. But before that, I'm going to note several points in these issues, several other my rebuttals on this idea. First is this notion that relationships based on love is different from relation based on materialistic needs. Members of the House, here's one problem. In ours, while we agree that relationship that a certain kind of relationship should be based on love, one that is based for more permanent relationship, arranged to the level of marriage, we as a society actually tolerates different kinds of relationships beyond that relationship based on love. We do not believe, for example, that everybody have moral obligation to get married, or that any other types of relationship is not morally acceptable. Maybe marriage based on relationship based on marriage is excellent. Maybe that's the best goal, and society might want to promote that. We take a position on that. However, it is certain that we tolerate certain kinds of marriages that have moral thresholds far beyond the demands of relationship love. For example, we tolerate one-night stands in which individuals are exchanging mutual personal pleasure, right? And we also do not put in jail people who, for example, even if the exchange is somewhat unequal. For example, it turns out that the partner is incompetent in executing his sexual duties, and therefore the other partner is not happy. We are still not putting other people in jail, but putting the other people in jail or using stigmatization towards this individual. Other kind of relationships for individuals, for example, if a relationship is based on sexual pleasure alone, if it's long term or it is continuous for quite a while, that is also still something that is morally acceptable from us. So what opposite side have did not manage to show is what is the moral distinction? Why must the relationship based on love? We argue that relationship based on love is good, but what they have not shown is relationship based on material gain is something that is not morally acceptable. Another notion as well is that individuals have contractual freedom, right? Individuals, when they engage the other kinds of relationship, does not necessarily have to have emotional relations, right? So if you have, for example, you have a purely business exchange, that is acceptable. If individuals have, for example, a purely exchange based on interest, that's also acceptable. Why must we evaluate the relationship based on exchange of sexual favors to monetary gain in different ways? For example, if the exchange of service is service that's provided, for example, doing your homework for you or doing some assignment for you, what is the moral difference? The state's opposition is not able to provide that explanation, and therefore we think that the relationship is, even if the relationship is not based on love, even if it's inferior, allegedly inferior, it is still morally acceptable, and therefore this is not a problem. Secondly, as well, we believe that these relationships are going to traumatize people and harm people and so on. However, people are harmed even in relationship based on love, right? People are often hurt when they pick the wrong partner. People are often hurt when relationships fail because actually there is no mutual connection and there is no fit between these two individuals. But it's not the job of our society to ensure and matchmake everyone to make sure that everybody is always happy, right? Rather, we leave the individuals to chance, allow them to grow and learn from their relationships. And if it fails, tough luck. That's the reality of life. So we don't think why, because then this situation is going to be something that's so morally unacceptable. Finally, they're not talking about these ideas that we are only defending the good best case scenario. Members of the House, because the examples that are clearly illegal right now. So if we are not required to defend illegal approaches. So for example, they say ideas like forced marriages, parents forcing children to get married. In many countries, forcing children to be married is violation of their human rights, and it's something that's illegal. People are supposed to consent to their marriages. So therefore, we are not going to defend that because that's not our obligation. That is clearly illegal. It's already a law against that. So therefore, it's not our problem. So moving on to my argument. First is that we want to have a talk about this theory of autonomy that underpins the concept of partners in materialistic relationships. And we think that in relationships, the idea is that individuals who are exercise autonomous decision should be left the heck alone, members of the House. What is this notion of autonomy that we're talking about? When we are talking about the idea of autonomy, there are 3 points. The first point is the idea of individuals being competent to make decisions on their own. Secondly, is the notion that individuals are well informed on making decisions on their own. And thirdly, there is the absence of coercion. Now, on the idea, first, the competence of individuals to make decisions on our own. Members of the House, individuals who enter these relationships are adults. And therefore, we have presumption, the feasible presumption, that they already are able to make decisions on their own. On their side of the House, when the argument here is that individuals are incompetent because they have lack of economic power to say no. However, this is strange and weird because their argument says as well that there are other autonomic options. Therefore, they're actually competent. They actually have competence to say no. Moreover, this is a level of competence that's based on coercion, and that analysis is quite different. Secondly, as well, the reason why they're competent as well is that because these individuals of sound mind, individuals who have personal capability, they are not being trapped somewhere. So on question of competence, individuals are competent to make the situation. They make a big point on this idea that individuals are not informed because they don't know about the situation and so on and so on. Members of the House, however, this is a problem with a lot of kind of relationships. We often enter relationships blindly and badly. And yet we as a society does not stigmatize these individuals. We as a society does not believe that this relationship is illegal or unacceptable. So if individuals have no information or no beneficial information, then there is no also point or need for stigmatization either. Because if there is lack of information, then we provide information. Moreover, stigmatizing these relationships only make these relations underground and therefore very difficult for us to actually gain good information about what kind of relationship that happens. When this relationship is not stigmatized, what works, what happens can be asked to other people who are going to these relationships before, and because they're not stigmatized, people are willing to share this information. Therefore, individuals are better competent under our model rather than under that model. Thirdly, on this idea of coercion. On this idea of coercion, coercion is not immorally unacceptable if the other party uses power to make others do our bidding, then we are unwillingly to do so. So in the case of physical coercion, this is clear. If you hurt someone, if they don't want to get married to you, or if you pay someone else to hurt someone so they don't want to get married, then that is something that is a coercion. Economic coercion might mean, for example, in cases in which you actually have financial debt prior to entering that relationship, and then as payment for debt, you enter that relationship. But that is already morally wrong. That is not the scope of this debate. What happens in this matter is that these individuals have economic lack. However, the economic lack is not the fault of the other party, members of those. And therefore, if this is the fault of the other party, there is no economic coercion either in this relationship. When there is no coercion, when these individuals are competent to make this decision, when these individuals actually can be well informed and can be well informed under this model, it is actually much better for us to allow individuals to choose and make their own mistakes rather than stigmatize them. We are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, second speaker of affirmative and speak 8 minutes 24 seconds. Now let's call for the second speaker of negative. Ow! Man. Second speaker of negative. Hello, am I audible? Second speaker of negative.
Yeah, you're audible. Sorry, I was just preparing myself. Right. So I'm loud and clear, right?
Yeah, very clear.
Cool. Wait. Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Opposition thinks human dignity cannot be substituted by any amount of money, by any superficial illusion of stability or the lack of a social enforcement or a social norm. Human dignity is the most important thing, and that is what we stand for on opposition. I just want to comment on DPM's stance on this debate. I think he took us to another debate, because look at his cases, and the first speaker case as well, actually. They mentioned that it's bad to stigmatize people because people should have their own choices on what kind of relationships that they want because they're adults, because they can consent to this. That is a case against all kinds of stigmatization in society, against all kinds of norms in society that actually make society a better place. We think that that is too extreme to take in this debate, right? This debate should talk about whether this specific stigmatization brings good impact or not. They've just been escaping that burden that they have to answer. Before I move on to my extension, which is going to talk about why stigmatization is the right direction for the feminist movement, I'm going to give a few responses. The first thing that DPM told you is that this is an inconsistency of societal norms because you tolerate one-night stands and you tolerate such things, right? That's irrelevant, right? There is a stigmatization, by the way, on one-night stands in Indonesia and Asia. We hate people who don't commit to their relationships. So that's actually not the debate, right? But let's even answer what they demanded. The exclusivity of judging people by their monetary value is that it's replaceable. That's why it's more likely for you to cheat on sugar daddies, for example, because you found someone who's richer than them and the relationship isn't stable or secure, right? You don't see your partner as someone who is humane and has unique characteristics that you can definitely hold on to for the rest of your life, that you definitely like for, right? Because money is replaceable. People are going to be harmed there. The second thing that they say is that people are harmed in relationships based on pure love as well. But the question that Kak Satrio never answered was which relationship is more likely to produce that harm. Hafid already told you actually that it's more likely for that to happen in monetary based relationships because the pressure for you to keep sustaining that relationship is that you have to keep your money even though we exist in a case of severe financial crisis all the time. For example, you could lose that money, all that hard work that you gave for your partner in one night because of a financial crisis, for example. That's not something that is guaranteed, right? Our side is more guaranteed because your personality is who you are. You will keep that and you will keep pleasing your partner based on your love language, for example. And these are more sustainable things. But what I also want to add is that the parameter of a healthy relationship, apart from security, is communication, for example, how you actually solve problems when they arise. On the government side, the way that you solve problems is by buying your partner gifts, right? Because that's what the relationship was based from the first place. Like how you date, where you date, what kind of gifts you buy for them. That's what makes a good relationship. That's the initial expectation that partners have on the government side. The problem with that is when you are incapable of doing that, probably because you are, having difficulties in your job because the job market is simply getting more competitive, which it always does. You overwork yourself in order to make these requirements. We think that that's just going to be toxic and that takes away the human dignity of these people because they have to be someone who is other than themselves. Even their dignity is not regarded. Only their money is going to be regarded. The problems are not going to be solved. Even if it's solved, it takes away human dignity. How opposition solve problems is that you understand each other, you give people space, and you compromise. Because what you love is the person and who they are only. Next rebuttal. On autonomy, right? We're going to talk about consent and stuff here. So that lack of autonomy is likely going to happen only if you do not have the stigma. That is an exclusive harm under the government side. Like my mom and grandma are telling me to just marry a rich, smart person right now. There's too much illusion that people will fall into with the appeal of money. So consent is not guaranteed on government side. And you should remove that expectation of financial security and parents that keep telling their kids to marry rich people by providing the counter narrative that's exactly the stigmatization of these kinds of relationships that will tell people what is actually wrong with these kinds of relationships, that will scrutinize these kinds of relationships. Only on our side will you get that scrutiny and actually point out the facts that these relationships are likely to fall because of monetary reasons themselves, right? Understand that the number one reason of divorce is financial problems. That's why you shouldn't come into a relationship expecting financial security, expecting all the money in this world given to you. It's government's burden of proof to guarantee that on the next speaker. Otherwise, I think their case should fall. Okay, with that in mind, now I'll move on I'll add on some harms to government case as well. Here's the thing. Precisely because someone's future is going to appear more secure, then that over expectation is likely going to make them demand too much from the relationship, and that's going to make an imbalance in the relationship that's likely to make conflicts from the first place because your expectations are misaligned. Right, onto my extension now, why stigmatization is the right direction for feminist empowerment. So opposition supports feminist movement discouraging these relationships, right? It's not just people's own businesses that you shouldn't take care of, like what government tried to tell you. It is the feminist movement's business as well. They directly impact this. Understand that in a status quo, as a result of centuries of disenfranchisement, women are second to men in terms of economy, right? Because they lack in education, they were excluded from power and financial opportunities by men. In the status quo, in the government world, you justify women wanting to counter this by entering the relationships that are financially beneficial for them, right? Why is this bad for the movement? By the way, this engages on their best case, even if you have a loving relationships, it's going to compromise the feminist movement and the agency of all women as a whole. So what are these harms? 3 things that happen on government side. Firstly, the comfort of this relationship is going to remove the pressure for women to pursue self-empowerment and to better themselves, to work hard in their jobs, for example, because they just see this illusion that there's a glass ceiling above them and it's too hard to overcome that. They just assume that, oh, they're not Malala, for example, so they cannot exceed those glass ceilings, right? We're not saying that women should bear a crucifix, but we think that they are the only ones that can help themselves because the males currently in many societies, both conservative and liberal, are being unhelpful and just wanting power for themselves, right? The most sustainable way that the feminist movement can work is on opposition side, when the endeavor doesn't rely on the generosity of your oppressors. Second harm, women are seen as weak because the way that they mobilize and the way that they empower themselves is they ask for men's help. When you see the financial disparity of a woman and a man in a sugar daddy relationship, for example, you directly judge and infer that this woman is actually incapable and only surviving and doing good because of the man, right? So people see them as they're actually nothing without the man. This materializes in harms like mansplaining, like refusal to recommend your female colleagues because you see that these people are actually just relying on their husbands for their power and for their fame, for example, right? So the perception of women's inability causes actions that exclude women from even more opportunities under the government side. Third harm, the feminist movement is seen as just self-interested people who overly victimize themselves because people say now, look at these false rape accusations. Look at these women asking for too much affirmative action. Now they're trying to marry sugar daddies just to take all their money and, get the good for themselves. The importance of handling this on the personal level is because most frequently, what you see about male and female comparisons is the relationship that they do in society. That's why this is important, right? But the harm that you get on their side is that the feminist movement is only self-interested. So there are less people, less men who can actually, help the feminist movement as well, opting into the feminist movement because their interests are not benefited, and these people are seen as actually useless to society, only self-interested, right? They severely harm not only women in the relationships, but the feminist movement as a whole, proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for the speech. Second speaker of negative spends 8 minutes and 20 seconds. I call for the third speaker of affirmative.
Am I audible?
Loud and clear.
Sorry.
Yeah, dengar loud and clear.
Okay. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Member of the House, first things first, let's characterize what is, let's characterize how sugar daddy how relationship built upon materialistics or needs or exchange works, right? Like sugar daddy or cougars, right? We say that this type of relationship works. We say that this type of relationship exists to people who are actually to women who are actually in needs, right? We say that even if there's a small number or there is another exceptions of women who do not who are doing this without like any without no any other urgency, for example, they do not have like financial issue or something like that. But we say the majority of women who are actually engaging onto those relationships, that there mostly are people who are in need, for example, of material gains. For example, these women, for example, who do not have access, for example, to education, to money, to jobs, to financial stuff, for example. So they only have like resources like their body, for example, or their beauty, for example, right? So we say that these women who are ended up on those type of things, we say that it is morally excusable for these women to choose for those jobs, right? Even if for example the government already mentioned the harms of these women who are end up who are engaging onto this relationship, but we say that those things are excusable because um because we say, for example, maybe the government do not like have maybe the government who do not have enough capacity to provide more equal opportunities for for jobs or for educations to these women, right? So that's the reasons why, for example, they ended up choosing this type of job, for example, right? We are also if the oppositions are also afraid or concerned with the idea of exploitation, for example, we say that the exploitation is not mutually exclusive, for example, right? We say that the exploitation could happen in every job, for example, right? So we say that the harms that the harms of exploitations is always be there, and just because you are, for example, stigmatizing this people, these people who are engaged on those relationships doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to like remove you are going to remove the harms like expectations, right? um let's also talk about the idea of empowerment, right? um we say uh we s- uh, we say that like the main concern of the opposition was that like human dignity is more important rather than materialistic gains, right? But but we say that who can create the standards of human dignity, right? Just because, for example, you are engaged on this relationship doesn't mean that you are going to be your value as a human being are going to be degraded, for example, right? We say that these type of stigmatizations are actually empowering the idea of the narrative of slut shaming to women, for example, right? The idea of like um the idea of, for example, women have to fulfill certain standards. For example, women have to like keep their dignity, like women have to like that's the reasons why, for example, some countries are glorifying the idea of virginity, for example, because they create a standards of how women should be, right? But we say that by this type of relationship it actually empowers the idea that women can actually choose what type of relation they can choose what type of life they would like to have without necessarily have to follow the society standard, right? Therefore we say that the empowerment actually happening to under our set the house, right? Let's also talk about the idea of let's talk about how this type of relationship works, right? We say that some women are actually using this type of relationship as a professional works, as a professional things, for example, right? They uh, you know um, how to say that they could differentiate, for example, their real relationship and also their their professional relationship. Why we think that their professional relationship, right? We say that that is part of empowerment, because we say that now women can actually women who are actually in control, right? Let's say what happens in history, in previous history, like say let's see in previous history, like prostitutions, for example, or something like prostitutions, for example, or porn industry, for example, how mostly these things are controlled by men, right? But now there is a progressivity in this type of workers, right? Like there's only fans, for example, where it's like porn industry, but it is controlled by the women, right? It is controlled by the women. Now women who are in power, right? That's also happened to this type of relationship like sugar daddy or cougars. Now women do not need pimps, for example, to match them with any other guys, right? Now women have choice to choose. If they do not want to be with that sugar daddy, for example, they can just say no, right? And we say that even if and we say that the harms that could be created by stigmatizing these women, we say that just like any other professional works, if you are segmentizing them, then then you are going to like make them, we say that every works have like problems and issues, right? When those issues happen and when those problems happens, then we think that these women are not going to seek for help, right? Because they are already stigmatized, for example, and there's no protection for these women, right? Because they are already stigmatized, right? And also if we really overvalue the idea of like like mutual or emotional bonded of relationship, right? We say that at the end of the day, even if this type of relationship is wrong, is morally unacceptable, we say that by you stigmatizing them, you are not going to make this you are not going to make these women eventually like change themselves and pursue those type of an overrated relationship, right? Because you already stigmatize them, and then you already make them like even more, how to say, they are going to feel like judged. You are going to tear their self-esteem already, and that's what prevents them to change and fulfill the standards of the society of how relationships should be, right? For those reasons, I'm back to propose. Thank you.
Okay, third speaker of affirmative spend 7 minutes and 39 seconds. By the way, ini itu ya apa? Australs, so you actually have 20 seconds. 8 minutes 20 seconds. But never mind. So goes to the third speaker of F negative. Time is yours.
Am I audible?
Yeah, very clear.
All right, cool. Speaker, half of our population in status quo is currently seen as an object that you can purchase through being rich, an object that you can choose on the list of your Instagram followers because you're rich enough to afford a Ferrari. This is a huge effing insult to our mothers, sisters, and friends. We think this has to stop precisely because this exacerbates the circumstances for them in the long run, both in relationships and self-actualization. I'll structure my speech in two broad areas clash. First of all, which side of the house allows for more meaningful relationships. Secondly, why women are seen as objects on their side of the house. In this clash, I'm going to answer the question about which side of the house makes women more structurally independent financially. Before that, I want to delete PM and DPM's case about morality. They have two main push here. Firstly, this is equivalent to mother and father and parents' care. But how is this exactly the same? They're not romantic, nor are they like children just don't kiss their parents, right? They're familial relationships. No. Obviously, this is not equivalent. Firstly, because parents have a financial duty, because there's absolutely no alternative for their children to opt out of their financial support. Our framing was that women have other choices. But secondly, we're going to tell you here that familial relationships is absolutely different. Why is this true? Because oftentimes as a children, you love your parents, not necessarily because they pay your bills, your school fees. I think that's a huge insult to a lot of children. But of other external reasons like affection or the fact that they care about you so much, that's how you love your parents. Our point was that these women hinge their entire love on their husband's money, and that's why it's morally unjust. Secondly, they told you here stigmatizing is none of our business because it was their pure agency. But they pointed out themselves that this was coerced choice and this was Hobson's choice for the women. They think that they don't have choice. We told you the moment we stigmatize this, that's when women realize that they have the agency and other mechanisms in which they can finally succeed independently in terms of financials. But our point was that these individuals don't have information. They've been put in a society that tells them that they can't go have a job as a woman, or rich men are put in a society that tells you if you don't have a wife and kid, you failed life. That's why it's important to disillusion them because these choices are illegitimate. But this was even more unjust on their side of the house, because the moment the counterfactual narrative on their side of the house is that proposition is going to romanticize and glorify these relationships. That is what distorts their agency and makes them opt into these relationships. That they say this is morally excusable. We say it's morally necessary. On our side of the house, you stigmatize this relationship because you're going to harm people on a much more larger scale. First clash then. Which side of the house allows for more meaningful relationship? I'm gonna flag out our material here. Firstly, we told you that it was uniquely important that these couples pave their relationships over more tangible and important things like personality. That we fleshed out clearly why materialistic relationships are oftentimes going to end up toxic because of a couple of structural reasons. Firstly, because we tell you that the moment you bank your love towards an individual for money, as a woman, the moment your husband experiences things like financial instability because of random unluckiness, that's when your love gets undercut. We told you this is important because the point of a relationship isn't to get financial security. That's the point of a job. The point of a relationship is that you get unique emotional affection from your partner. We told you it was the unique type of love when you know that someone really loves you because of who you are. That's why women don't get that on their side of the house the moment they value only money, right? I know they might argue that the rich person in the relationship still loves them, but it's important that relationship isn't only about loving the other partner, but also about loving yourself, but also about you giving out love to another person, for instance. That you feel like you truly care about someone you love, and that gives fulfillment that is unique. That is why it's bad for women on their side of the house. But second thing to no response as well. This is also bad for the rich men. I know they sound evil, but we need to talk about them a little bit more. They feel like they're useless in society where women only look at them by looking at how much they have in their bank account. That it was important the moment these individuals lose wealth, that's when they lose their love. It doesn't stop here. We pointed out why oftentimes, even without stigmatization, these rich men actually know that their girlfriend stays there only for their money. But finally, our scenario-based argument about exploitation and things like abuse was never responded to. That the moment you marry a rich man, that the moment you grow financially complacent and completely financially tied, because you're accustomed to rich lifestyle, that it was possible for these rich men to abuse them and exploit their wives without consequences, because these women would still prefer having money but being abused. We want to talk about choice. Obviously, you can't consent to things like abuse or domestic abuse. There was absolutely no response to this. Secondly, we told you here why women are seen as objects on their side of the house, and why that's bad in a macro level. Their main push is about how society is patriarchal, and there's absolutely zero chance for these women to try themselves and become independent. They tell you society is patriarchal and women can't succeed no matter what. Not a second in their speech gives you any structural analysis as to how the society is patriarchal. We gave you structural incentive as to why women's livelihoods are better on our side of the house. You can't just throw buzzwords in a debate. What did we tell you in response? And note that this response neatly to their claims about material fulfillment, because we don't think that's mutually exclusive. Firstly, we told you the moment we stigmatize them, which I think means that we can claim that as granted in the debate, that there are less materialistically tied couple on our side of the house. What does this do? Note that this allows for three things to happen, which we heard no response to. Firstly, the moment women cannot opt into marrying rich men, that's when they're forced to find other ways to make themselves financially stable independently. That means more women will see that they have to work instead of marrying rich men to become rich. This means that by statistics, you have more chance of women having more independent women on our side of the house. But crucially, this also means you motivate other women to work because of things like trailblazers we're happy to have. If this succeeds, this signals to the world that women is indeed a fruitful labor that is worthy to work in offices or corporations. Secondly, we told you structural reasons as to why this is possible. Things like progressiveness in general, and things like how most of the barriers are cleared up. Let's look at things like affirmative action, or let's look at trailblazers like Christine Lagarde, AOC, and any other lower degree CEOs and businessmen that I don't know of, but it's statistically true. This means that there's a huge chance for them to succeed. But finally, even if we bite the bullet here and say these things don't work and every woman suddenly fails and become miserably poor, note that government has the incentive not to have a lot of poor people sitting in their houses not being employed. They have the incentive to run and circulate the economy and make the most out of it. These are structural rebuttals as to how success is possible in our side of the house. They might respond by saying, even if this is true, why don't women already do this in status quo? Because this is an innate, inherent culture implanted in their brains. They lack the initial push to leapfrog and try. But finally, how do you weigh this debate? Even if you buy Satrio's moral victory about coercion and autonomy, we make the clash asymmetrical and break the deadlock with these two following claims. First of all, we told you structurally that materially tied relationships are not sustainable. At best, government's case was to say that it was okay to jump down a cliff because you consent to it and it's your bodily autonomy. Secondly, we told you our claim about how this allows for more protection of the lives of women who aren't so lucky on their side of the house to be able to marry rich men from things like structural objectification and disenfranchisement, and we secure a better future for them, just like the things I told you in my previous class, and like the material my deputy gives you, both of which we heard absolutely no response to. Even if they get material fulfillment on their best case, there was no weighing as to why material fulfillment is more important than emotional affection that you get from an actual relationship. The tipping point here is when we pointed out the structural reasons as to why these women can succeed independently, even without marrying like rich men. Even if you think it is moral to choose your own decisions, it is morally egregious the moment your choice goes to the detriments of the other women in the society and harms other individuals. For all of these reasons, I'm so proud to win.
Okay, thank you for the speech. Now to close the case from negative, I call negative reply.
Hi, am I loud and clear? Hello?
Hello, okay. Hello.
Okay. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 4:20. Yep, got it. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Love and dignity transcends financial need or just the low burden that government took, which is your security, your financial needs, self-preservation, and whatnot. From the get-go, we were more realistic in human needs, and that's why we win this debate. But actually, understand that this is a close debate, but there are still many reasons that opposition can win. So please listen to my reply speech. There are 4 reasons that I want to bring why we win in today's debate. Firstly, government fails to defend the most central clash of this debate, which is relationships. This is a relationship debate. So the most important question is why the relationship will be mutually beneficial, why it will be healthy, right? What did government side say on this? They said that people consented to the relationship. They said that at least they can self-preserve, right? But when we gave you challenges, like how this relationship is likely going to be toxic, how it's unsustainable because financial conditions are unpredictable, how people are likely to even cheat and make the relationship never actually secure because they can suddenly lose their money or find someone who is richer. When we said that money makes you very replaceable and it's a bad parameter for a relationship, they fail to engage on any of this, right? They fail on the most central case of this debate. Opposition explained to you the structural analysis of likelihood of why the relationship is likely going to be healthier under our side, because there is less pressure, because you are only needed to be yourself, right? Because there's going to be better communication when the way that you solve problems isn't just by buying gifts and making temporary distractions that do not solve the reasons for your conflicts or your disagreements or maybe your political beliefs that are conflicting and whatnot, right? We solve the root problem, we provide a better relationship. Second reason that we win. Government plays on opposition's best case, but they did not even answer their own best case. Their case only works if people are so poor, which my leader of opposition negated by saying that, in order to please a sugar daddy, you even need to be financially able, you need to be presentable, you need to buy makeup and whatnot. So you're probably not in that bad of a condition. But even if no, we said that at best government only gives survival, but people do not understand why they're in this relationship, whether they're actually loved for being who they are, whether there's actually a purpose, and whether their feelings are actually reciprocated, for example, right? That takes away their human dignity, which we think is a bigger harm than your financial security. The only question then is, what if people could not consent to this relationship? The biggest question that we kept on asking the government side, but they never actually answered, right? What if there was no consent and the relationship actually had no love in it, for example, right? Then it's going to be an unhealthy relationship because they never answered why it's still worth it to pursue these relationships. Third reason we win, because we provided to you the importance of human dignity. This answers their best case. We think that at best, what you get on government side is just temporary financial security, financial survival, for example, right? But that it's not a worth it trade-off for your dignity, for having sex with your sugar daddy just to get some money out of them, for example. That's something that they never framed against us, so we still win on the basis of framing. But the fourth reason that we win is that we have more link back to stigmatization, because this debate is about stigmatization. All the arguments needed link back to what society will actually experience, right? So saying that it's not your business to judge people, to handle people in their relationships isn't a persuasive argument in this kind of debate. The question is whether this stigmatization gives good impacts or bad impacts, right? It's not about the mere justification of the stigmatization. We explained to you that this creates a bad culture in society because of toxic relationships, but what we also told you was that this creates a bad direction for the feminist movement as well, right? Because people are encouraged into relationships where they are objectified, where they are actually seen as weak, for example, and incapable, and actually that causes them to be excluded from opportunities. You never see any sufficient engagement that came from government side. All of their engagement were defensive, saying that this happens, the harms happen in work as well. We think that was not sufficient. That's just them running away from their burden. Please make us win.
Thank you for the speech. Three plus speakers speak 4 minutes 17 seconds. Now to close this debate in affirmative case, let's call affirmative report.
Okay, am I audible?
Very clear.
Okay. Let's start in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, notice that team government, for all their talk, they have not touched on the very single most important thing of the debate. They have still not proven to you why, by stigmatizing these women who are most likely poor, and even if they are not poor, why then does this help? Why then does this further the cause of feminism to make women more independent? They still have not characterized you. 1, how does this kind of relationship work? 2, what are the distinctions? Why should these kind of relationship be in something that is based on love? We agree about their human dignity, but then so what? When we stigmatize these women, does this actually help us get structural reform? We don't see why their argument is actually exclusive. So that said, let's look at their arguments one by one and let's deconstruct it. Their first argument is that they characterize these relationships as coercive, and they want young people like these women who are deprived of their opportunity to find jobs to get them. The problem is, first of all, we live in a very patriarchal society. If it isn't clear enough, women, if they're ugly, no one wants to accept them in jobs. If they're average, they're overshadowed by men. If they're beautiful, they're only seen as a hot body and a pretty face. And if they're successful, they are only seen as sleeping their way to the top. We see that this is extremely coercive to women, and they say that, oh, we force women to find jobs, to actually work and find more opportunity. We say this is cruel for you to close one opportunity for them. Even if we say that this is not morally that good, you're actually closing one gate that is for them, and you force them to go into this even more cruel place. So government says that it strips these young people of their opportunity. We say it is the fault of the government themselves, who are not able to provide an equitable and egalitarian society. So we don't see why actually stigmatizing these women for engaging in something that can be seen as self-preservation and self-interest for their own gain as something that should be stigmatized as. They only said that it is immoral for you to say that, okay, it's you preserve yourself, but it is immoral for you to do so. Listen, side opposition wants to stigmatize these women for preserving themselves. We have to ask the opposition what kind of moral stance that they have. We have proven to you the moral framework that something has to be moral when etc. and etc. Second of all, they want emotional fulfillment and human dignity. First of all, the problem is that they still have not given you a proper distinction. So what kind of relationships are there? What are the basic of a relationship? We have said to you that it is a covenant where both parties get fulfillment. So why is this kind of material-based relationship different from your other kind of relationship between a husband and a wife? They still have not given you a moral distinction. All we have given to you that it is just the same because it is the covenant-based relationship. So anyway, even if you believe that their argument is true, they only take for granted that these men are evil. Number one, they only play on their worst or on their best case scenario. Number two, they only say that okay, let's just tell women to work. Let's just tell women to work. They do not. They neglect reality at its very core. Okay, so even then, let's see let's see what we bring. First of all, we bring that one, these actions, these relationships cannot be stigmatized because one, these actions are not immoral. We have already proven to you with several principles. Number two, they said that these relationships are coercive. We have already given to you the theory of autonomy, and they cannot give a proper response to it. Number three, we have already given to you why the stigmatization in the status quo actually in the status quo is associated with slut shaming. And if they want to further their feminist cause, we don't see why actually stigmatizing them and closely associating them as sluts will actually help these women to be empowered. You want these women to be independent, but you tell them that they are sluts. We don't see why is it logical. For those reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Okay, affirmative reply spans 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Okay, so give me 10 minutes to assess this debate. Don't leave from this room. Yeah. Okay, wait for my reference. Thanks. Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello.
Okay, okay. Before the roll call dulu ya. Affirmative complete ya, I guess. Okay, opposition complete.
Complete.
Okay. Before that, am I clear?
Yeah.
Am I clear? Okay. Okay. Without further ado, sudah mau malam juga. So, okay. Thank you for this debate. Now I'm going to give my verbal assessment. Basically comprised of overview and then decision and reasoning of which one winning in this debate. For the overview, I guess in this debate, I expect this debate is already a very good debate, very fulfilling debate because most of the bench already touch basic aspect of debate. Both of benches already provide which one important stakeholder we are talking about, and we already provide enough characteristics about how this what kind of stakeholder it is, what kind of being minor women, of what kind of being part of the society we live in. Also, most of you have already provided enough case analysis and portrayal what happened in the status quo, although according to the status quo perspective, although according to bench's perspective, and all of you can provide, in my perspective, already a complex analysis such as what kind of morality on the relationship and what kind of harms and benefits happening in such relationship, whether it's a materialist relationship or love relationship. The only thing that I find is quite inconvenience in this debate is simply about the matter of engaging of both case. In the matter of engaging, it doesn't mean that this debate lack of responses or rebuttals. I think most of you already have provide good responses and rebuttals. It's simply I saw this debate. Both teams have different starting point and contextualization of these cases. Both often have different starting point on what kind of characterization. In the government case, talking about there is a trend with women is have like accessibility in first honor, and the only thing the only thing that when people want to have a self fulfillment and also self what kind of self fulfillment and self preservation is true by seeking a partner, even if it's material. On the other hand, the opposition talking about the toxic relationship, toxic relationship, and so on. So both of them have different Okay, this is not the fault of teams. It is not about strategic. It's simply like I find this debate difficult to assess and difficult to view since both of you have different starting perspective. But I find this debate so important. So now I'm going to the decisions and the reasoning, which is I find there's three classes in this debate. First of all, about this justification of stigmatization, on which relationship are more moral, on both case, which of the team can provide which relationship is actually more moral. Second classes is about the harm and benefit on the material relationship we are talking about in this debate. And third of all, the classes is about harm and benefit if stigmatization is assumed justified. Now going to explanation about one class, first classes. So basically, the government is talking about that relationship in this matter is actually based on self-fulfillment and self-preservation and also mutual fulfillment, even in the both of the parties. But in the government case, it's case based on materials and also some characterization and framing about how women in this would access like access in the first hand. While the opposition mostly talking about relationship based on relationship should be based on love and chemistry. Other on that is most likely the relationship will be toxic and immoral and will be bad and giving provide harm. Although the harm will be second, it just the justifications. In these classes is win by governments in this case because here's the thing. Let me explain clear the resume of the resume of case of the government team. So government team, I will give example that in order for you to stigmatize some such trend or such relationship, first of all, we have to assess the exercise the moral basis in this case. The, the team of the government is providing that in order for this relationship is at the very least fulfilling one thing. It can be fulfilling, and also it can be it's also preserving it within each other. And no matter the basis of the relationship, whether it want to material, it want to be based on love, and after all, it's no matter because after all, it all this happen. Even some characteristic is as of some which is love. It's not always meaning that some of relationship is superior because it's all based of the individual, both of the individual consent or individual compromising each other. So in this case, I find that the opposition only simply engaging in this case, but simply this is will be toxic, it will be asymmetrical, but never explain in their first hand, even if it is bad, why we have to push relationship based on love and communication and so on. And even in some extension by the speaker talking about the legal prerequisite, which is when you only can stigmatize people if it bring harm. However, the opposition may bring a harm analysis, but not explain why the harm is so bad or harm is already exists, which is the prerequisite that being brought by government never being engaged, and most likely talking about body autonomy, which is the first speaker talking about in the case of the relationship, it's already moral. At least both of the cases, both of the parties acknowledge the autonomy within each other, and and also we are talking about the exercise of adult and adult accepting the rights within each other. I guess it's like opposition only engaging that no that what happened will be asymmetrical and so on without talking why even in this case the justification is exists in your relationship. And most importantly, opposition lack of detail of what kind in your analysis, in your case, moral relationship through love, through understanding, it will be explaining. In the case of the government, explaining by in the even in the relationship of base material, when people have lack of material access, have lack of fulfillment into material in this world, when people need money, need financial stability, and so on, it's still better for us to have engaged relationship. And unfortunately, in the opposition, never explain why in your case, relationship through understanding is very clear what kind of characteristic it has is by is lack of further detail. So that's why this class has been out by the first by the government. Second class is talking about harm and benefit of the material relationship, which is government talking about there is only benefit because there is a lack because the important stakeholders such as women lack of resources for the person or lack of criteria. Even male also have resources and criteria to be fulfilling in the standard of relationship in the existing. Opposition talking about there is a toxic there will be a harm in the form of toxic relationship based on profit orientations, but asymmetrical power relationship, because there is a risk of objectification on some parties, most likely by men, objectify women, and also the harm on harm of the dependency according to the feminist view. So In this case of the classes, it is win by opposition in this case, which is because simply I find that even if government bringing about the idea of why there's no justification for the stigmatization, they never only in the case I consider that more government only play in the best case when stating that this will be no risk of toxic, there will be no risk of asymmetrical racism, there no risk of objectification, so on. It will be good. And after all, it is not a debate because at least they're not harming each other, but never talking why. Even in the case of material, there will be no harm. In this case, of course, in the opposition who might have further description of what kind of battle system is happening asymmetrical. There will be a dependency for the women to rely on the financial stability of the women, which is already asymmetrical. We get clear imagination of whether it will be harm for women's, and also also clear in their case there is a bad of communication if it only based on profit because people will seeking with communication or simply about which one can provide better profit and so on, and also how people will be objectified because we only see each other as objective object which one can provide fulfillment and about understanding of human dignity, and so on. This class is winning by opposition. Now to break the to find taking a tipping point in this to the two teams we have a different starting point is the question about where if stigmatization is assuming is just or acceptable at the very least, which one can bring harm and benefits. So government provide there is a lack of incentive and meaning for women to be acknowledged if it's stigmatizing because it's further broken to the despair because as their decision being shunned by everyone in stakeholders. And while the opposition simply said, I vote, and what I hear is simply make them realize, or at the very least, we struggle to make women will be empowered through structural reformation. But I'm not really clear, understand clearly. There is no clear explanation about that. In these classes, win by the government simply this thing because I find that the government one of the main point of government is about the harm of stigmatization when it is happening, which is if the justification is already enough, even if it's happening, there's another further practical harm that's happening in the government case. In this case, they already portrayed that women in this debate is already have like access. They find that the choices is already limited in the first hand, which is also be considered by the opposition, and so on. When we suddenly stigmatize this relationship, even for the man, even for the women, and also whoever it is, it's only giving more difficulties to provide information within two stakeholders because they find it being shunned, they will be stigmatized. There is lack of this incentive to speak up, this incentive to disempower because for women already being dependent or women being tied to seeking empowerment through the financial relationship by the partner, there will be no any meaning for us to be stigmatized. Especially also there's also bring about emotional harm and mental harm when promiscuity, judgment, and so on already being judged. When male decide to not being a breadwinner, it's already being judged. It's already ostracized society, and most importantly, spoke about the idea that society in the first hand already are not unforgiving for these people. The stigmatization only further their harm. I find this explanation acceptable. In the comparison with the opposition explanation is that they're only saying that stigmatization is justified, but never explain why after stigmatization after all will be better. I believe this is not something that giving too much burden to the opposition because they concede that we can still have benefit for the stigmatization. There's explanations such as we make them realize that it is a bad choice. We also, the opposition in my perspective, in my hearing, is also concede that there are also many means for the women to be empowered. But there is no explanation of why after stigmatization there is also still any room for them to be empowered. How in their case in the opposition, why the feminists decide to stigmatize them can giving empower freedom? How? It's only being taken for granted that suddenly people being shunned, people will be empowered. But I never, it never any explanation why this stakeholder will be seen that they have this problem, they are problematic and suddenly empowered. Never explained. In the comparison in the government explaining that there will be more burden and there will be more pressure when they being stigmatized. And also even when they fight that, yeah, we still agree there's a time when women are fulfilled. And also we consider we give women structural reform, but I think it's just simply might play in the best case, but never explain why this decision is getting another precedence to be better for the women who are being harmed in this opposition. So that's why in this case, winning by the government. So by three classes, we win by two classes winning by government, one classes winning the opposition. That so according amount is win by the government in a very close debate. So therefore, all my explanations, if you want any feedback, you can directly engage in the chat in the WA. I will notify for the room too. I guess that's all for this verbal. I thank you for this debate. This is very good debate, and I for you who prepare for the IFAT, good luck for you. I hope this debate can already illustrate what happened with the IFAT, so it will be good for you. It will be good yeah, very good material for you this debate. Thank you, thank you everyone. Good luck and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bang Jeffrey. Pamit dulu. Bye-bye.
Judge, thank you everyone.